Good evening and welcome to another edition of Dad's Divorce Live. I'm Angelyn Mitchell and I am an associate attorney with Cordell & Cordell in St. Louis, Missouri. And today I'm joined by Heather Biagi, who is also an associate attorney in the St. Louis office of Cordell & Cordell. So welcome, Heather.
Thank you.
And we're going to be talking about a couple of articles that Heather wrote for our website, DadsDivorce.com. They are entitled, "It's All in the Delivery, The Importance of Choosing the Best Method of Service," and "Oops, I Forgot to Ask for That, Important Things to Include in Your Initial Pleadings When Filing for Divorce." And Heather, if it's okay with you, I think we're going to start with the article about service.
That'd be fine.
And why don't we start with telling our listeners what service methods are available to them.
Okay. Obviously, these vary state by state, and obviously there's little nuances to each law. Generally, and at least in the state of Missouri, what from the point of view of what an attorney's office is actually going to utilize, it would be a method of service by the sheriff in the county in which you reside. It would be service by a special process server, and also hand delivery, which is also by the party, which would be voluntary entry of appearance and waiver of service of summons.
And Heather, why is it so important? Why is the choice of service so important?
I think it's important from a legal aspect as well as a relationship aspect. Legally, obviously, we want to get valid service so that your case can go ahead and progress, and we want to follow whatever laws are set forth in the state in which you reside or the state you're filing in. But I also think what's important, and people don't necessarily consider from even a strategy point of view, is what it does to a relationship, if there is one, between the parties. If you choose the wrong type of service, or you don't really put any thought into it, something that seems so minimal and not a big deal sometimes can have drastic effects on a court case. I mean, it can take a case that could be somewhat amicable to a case where everyone's fighting like cats and dogs.
Right. And of course, if you've got the opposing party who's going to be avoiding service, it makes that decision very important too.
Absolutely. It's my opinion, and again, you should always consult your attorney in the state you're in, or your attorneys, what they prefer from their knowledge and from their experience. But in my opinion, if you know that the person is going to avoid service, I would always choose special process server, simply because I feel like when I retain them, normally a law firm will have a special process server that they like to use quite a bit. Mm-hmm. So you've established a relationship with that person, and kind of what I feel like is if the client's paying for the special process server, I can call them night, day, whenever. I can give them special instructions, like I know she's going to be at work from 5 to 7, can you go tonight? Whereas I don't necessarily have that control over a sheriff. The special process server also have ways, since they're usually dressed in street clothes, mm-hmm. They do have to present some kind of credentials to certain places, but they can gain access. For instance, right. Even somebody that's going to be served, if a sheriff knocks on their door, they may see the badge or whatever and think, oh my God, why is this person knocking on my door and not even answer? Whereas if you have a special process server who's in their plain clothes, and again, they carry their credentials but don't necessarily have to have them out there, they could even say, hey, I just need directions. The person opens the door. They have absolutely no idea they're going to get served if it's that type of situation. And I will say, for most times that's kind of a rare situation, but mm-hmm. not one that we haven't seen.
Absolutely. And also, from my experience with special process servers, because I have one, like Heather said, that I typically use, I can call him up and say, this is what the person looks like, this is the hours that they will be at this place, this is when they're best reached, this is where they work, and therefore that gives him a much better chance of getting that.
This is the car they drive.
Right.
I've even had process servers when it's been extremely difficult, and again, we're talking about an extreme case where they've staked out, if you want to call it, the person's vehicle at work and waited till they were going to get in if they couldn't gain access to the place of employment or the residence, and said, hey, here's your papers, and served them at their car or somewhere like that. So you have that option when you're doing a special process server, as opposed to a sheriff. I don't believe any sheriff's going to wait around or stake out anybody, considering they have summonses and subpoenas to serve for the whole county.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And in my experience, I've even had special process servers look up the person's information, look up a picture of them, so they know exactly what they look like.
Go to
and
the
then they can track them down.
DMV records. Get a copy of the license. The special process servers seem to know their way. A lot of times, not always, but the special process servers are also private investigators or they're retired police, so they have ways of thinking that us attorneys don't necessarily think about, or the layman doesn't necessarily think like, hey, this is what I might need to serve this person. So, and again, even with the special process server, not in difficult cases, I typically use them in all of my cases simply because I like the control. I like the fact that the process server a lot of times only has my summons to serve, not the whole county's summonses or subpoenas to serve. And that, again, I can give them special directions. Also, they seem to be more well received in my experience with the opposing party. Simply because they are plainclothes, they're not being embarrassed. Sometimes when a sheriff, again, looking all official, comes either to your work or even to your home, it can sometimes be somewhat embarrassing, or they can perceive it as embarrassing because, neighbors have saw, coworkers have saw this person come and officially serve you with something. And, it's not quite as incognito when you have a sheriff doing that and whatnot. So in my opinion, a lot of times special process servers seem to get the job done quickly and efficiently, and also seem to cause the least amount of waves with regard to service.
I mean, can you just picture a police officer walking through the cubicles in your place of employment with their handcuffs jangling and
exactly.
a gun on their hip? You can imagine how people feel about having a cop approach them in that situation and serve them with papers, and everybody else in the office is whispering about what they just got served with.
Absolutely. And that's not to say that sheriffs don't do a great job. They most certainly do a great job. I think almost with every case I've ever had where I've had a sheriff serve them, they've gotten service almost the first time, because what I'm referring to there is normally, and again, it varies from state to state, and there's some debate about when a summons expires or when it doesn't, but generally a summons is good for about 30 days. If you can't get it served within those 30 days, then you have to go back and ask for, at least in Missouri, an alias summons, and then after that a pluri summons. And obviously we want to try to get them served within the time that just the normal summons is valid, simply because it's quicker, it's easier, no more money's expended in order to get those things done. So, but again, I've had a lot of, if you're on a tight budget, the sheriff is actually the person you probably want to serve, because they tend to be a little bit cheaper than a process server. Also, if you have a case, as in our practice, we are stationed basically in St. Louis, although we have cases out in further out counties, and the counties that aren't quite so busy, their sheriffs seem to have absolutely no problem. They don't get a lot of summonses to serve. And also, who wants to, look up a special process server way out in a county that you're not familiar with? If you have the sheriff's office, you're going to get it done. They know exactly where to go. They're probably more familiar with the town than any process server. So
absolutely, yeah. And of course, the sheriff is normally cheaper, which I think you mentioned.
Absolutely, almost in every case. Again, it varies depending upon what process server you use and what their fees are. And again, that's something to talk with whatever attorney you retain. The pros and cons, what that attorney feels like is probably in your best interest, strategy-wise and whatnot.
And of course, where to serve as well, because you usually have the place of employment or the home would be the typical places.
Absolutely.
And of course, one thing to consider if you're still living in the home together, whether the two of you want to be sitting in the living room and somebody knocks at the door with divorce papers or not. So that's something else to consider as well.
Yeah, again, you being in the relationship and you knowing this person better than an attorney, and I'm talking about more from a perspective of if you're filing for divorce or you're filing a paternity action or you're filing something that's like the initial court action, not necessarily motions to modify or motions for contempt, but you need to think about what your relationship is with this individual and put yourself in their shoes. If they were served in whatever manner, how is that going to impact your case? I mean, if you have kids in common and right now your wife or your husband, whatever the case may be, is freely letting you see your kids, if you serve that person at work, are they going to get so upset with you that they say, you know what, I don't want to get along with you anymore. I don't want to freely exchange the kids. This is going to be a bloody court battle at this point, and you're going to have to fight me tooth and nail over everything. I mean, it's just something to take into consideration with regard to the strategy of your case.
Right. And of course, you know, whether they know the divorce or a pleading is coming is a big thing too, and whether they're on the same page, they may not want divorce.
Right. And again, like Angelyn said, nothing is more uncomfortable than